The sky over Colony Karen 7 didn't break like a storm. It split. A clean, impossible fracture ran across the upper atmosphere as if reality itself had been scored by something far larger than physics. The first reaction from the orbital stations was confusion, sensor noise, solar interference, a glitch in gravitational mapping. Then the anomaly moved. Slowly at first. Then all at once. Shapes emerged from the tear in the sky. At first glance, they resembled meteors, burning fragments of light descending through atmosphere at terminal velocity. But the readings refused to stabilize. Mass estimates fluctuated between impossible extremes. Thermal output spiked and vanished in cycles that broke predictive modeling. Then visual confirmation arrived. And every human on Karen 7 stopped breathing at the same time. They were not ships. They were not drones. They were dragons. Gigantic, winged entities carved out of something that looked like molten gold and living obsidian. Their bodies stretched for kilometers, folding and unfolding through cloud layers like moving mountain ranges. Each wing beat did not just displace air, it rewrote pressure systems across entire hemispheres. Storm fronts reversed direction. Oceans responded with tidal anomalies. Mountain chains emitted low-frequency resonance like waking giants. Inside Outpost Virex, emergency alarms began to sound automatically, even before any human gave the order. Systems were designed for invasion scenarios, pirates, corporate warfare, rogue AI incursions. None of them had categories for mythological impossibility. Colonel Marcus Hale stood in the central observation deck, one hand pressed against the reinforced glass as if it could anchor him to something real. The glass itself vibrated under the passing of one of the creatures overhead, fracturing light into trembling patterns across the room. "Tell me those aren't alive," he said quietly. His voice wasn't a question anymore. It was a refusal. Science Officer Dr. Lyra Ree didn't respond immediately. She was frozen in front of her console, eyes scanning a cascade of corrupted readings. Every sensor feed conflicted with the next. Gravity maps rewrote themselves every second. Atmospheric composition logs kept resetting as if reality refused to finalize its own state. Finally, she spoke. "They're not in any Earth database," she said. Her voice sounded distant, like she was reading from someone else's memory. "Not in colonial catalogs either. Not even theoretical xenobiology covers anything remotely close." Marcus turned slightly. "So what are you telling me?" She hesitated. Then answered honestly. "I'm telling you they shouldn't exist." Outside, the largest of the dragons began its descent. The horizon bent before it touched the ground. Karen 7's northern ridge, an entire mountain range mined for helium extraction, was suddenly overshadowed by something far larger than geography allowed. The creature did not land so much as arrive. Space itself compressed around its presence, folding like paper under weight. When it finally made contact with the surface, there was no impact shockwave. Instead, there was silence. A silence so complete that every automated system across the colony paused its background noise checks, as if the world itself had entered standby mode. Then the ground responded. A seismic pulse rolled outward from the landing point, not like an earthquake, but like a message being transmitted through the crust of the planet. Entire infrastructure grids groaned. Distant mining towers tilted a fraction of a degree as stabilizers failed to interpret what they were experiencing. Marcus stepped closer to the glass. "What is it doing?" he asked. No one answered. Because they all felt it at the same time. A presence. Not sound. Not vibration. Something deeper, like thought being pressed directly into consciousness. Every human on the surface of Karen 7 heard the same word simultaneously, regardless of distance, shelter, or communication isolation. "This world is unregistered." Inside Outpost Virex, panic did not begin as chaos. It began as disbelief. Systems operators tried to override neural intrusion protocols. Psych officers checked for mass hallucination triggers. Communication engineers attempted to isolate signal sources that did not exist. Nothing worked. The message had not traveled through any medium. It had simply arrived. Marcus felt his grip tighten on the railing until metal began to deform beneath his hand. "This is not first contact," he said slowly. Ree finally looked up at him, face pale under emergency lighting. "No," she whispered. "It's classification." Outside, the dragon lifted its head slightly, as if listening to something far beyond the colony, far beyond the planet itself. And in that moment, Marcus understood something he couldn't yet explain. They were not being discovered. They were being evaluated. And whatever had arrived above Karen 7 had done this before. The silence after the message did not last. It never does when something impossible has already declared ownership of the sky. Inside Outpost Virex, emergency procedures erupted into motion like a nervous system firing on instinct. Bulkhead doors sealed. Atmospheric scrubbers pushed to maximum. Defense arrays rose from concealed shafts across the colony's perimeter, their barrels tracking the horizon with mechanical precision that suddenly felt absurdly small. Colonel Marcus Hale didn't hesitate. He watched the horizon for exactly 3 seconds after the words "this world is unregistered" burned across every human mind, then turned away from the glass. "Target the entity beyond Ridge Sector 9, he ordered. "All platforms. Full saturation." A pause. Then, louder. "Fire everything we've got." For a fraction of a moment, no one moved. Not because they were disobeying. Because something in them was still trying to decide whether this was real enough to warrant war. Then the colony's defenses activated. The sky answered. Missile silos beneath the crust opened like mechanical wounds. Dozens, then hundreds of projectiles erupted upward, leaving trails of incandescent fire across the atmosphere. Railgun platforms across 3 continents synchronized their firing cycles. Orbital defense mirrors redirected solar energy into concentrated lances of plasma. Karen 7 became a weapon firing at its own horizon. And the dragon did not move. It remained beyond the ridge, half visible through heat distortion and atmospheric turbulence, a vast silhouette carved against the sky. Its wings were folded now, not in rest, but in patience. As if waiting for something inevitable to conclude. The first missile reached it in under 40 seconds. It never detonated. It stopped mid-flight. Frozen in space like a photograph of violence paused before meaning. One after another, every incoming projectile slowed, then halted entirely. Railgun slugs suspended in the air like metallic hail caught in invisible glass. The entire battlefield became a sculpture of arrested destruction. Marcus stared. "That's not possible," someone whispered behind him. The dragon finally moved. One wing lifted. Not fast. Not dramatically. Just enough. The air itself reacted before the motion completed. Pressure collapsed inward across kilometers of terrain. Clouds inverted, spiraling upward as if gravity had forgotten its direction. The suspended weapons in the sky began to tremble. Then they turned. Every missile, every rail slug, every plasma charge rotated in perfect synchronization. And fell. Back toward Karen 7. The first impact erased Outpost Delta from existence before it even registered alarm. The second turned Northern Shield Array 17 into molten slag. The third never needed to land. The shockwave alone collapsed 2 subterranean bunkers and cracked the colony's eastern bedrock. Inside Virex, alarms stopped sounding. Not because systems had stabilized. Because systems no longer had time to interpret failure states. Marcus didn't look away from the horizon. The dragon tilted its head slightly. Curious. Not angry. Not retaliatory. Curious. As if it had expected resistance, but not the kind that mattered. Then it spoke again. Not through air. Not through radio. Through thought pressed directly into every surviving human consciousness. Defense is obsolete. The words did not echo. They settled. Like weight. Like verdict. Across the colony, automated turrets went silent. Some powered down. Others simply refused to track targets that no longer fit within their threat matrices. One by one, defensive systems began to fail, not from damage, but from contradiction. Marcus clenched his jaw. "Reroute orbital fire control," he snapped. "Bring down Station 3. I want." He stopped. Because something outside had changed. The other dragons were moving. More shapes were emerging from the clouds now, smaller than the first, but still vast beyond comprehension. They descended in formation, not chaotic, not predatory in the way humans understood attack patterns. They were positioning. Surrounding the colony. Enclosing it. Not like predators circling prey. Like observers closing a perimeter around a specimen. Science Officer Ree's voice cracked over the internal channel. "Marcus, they're not reacting like animals. They're coordinating. This is structured. Hierarchical." "I don't care what it is," Marcus said. But his voice had shifted. Less command. More urgency. "I want orbital response now." A pause from comms. Then the reply came, distant and strained. "Colonel, we already fired orbital assets." Marcus frowned. "Then fire again." Silence. Then, quieter. "Sir, they didn't come back." For the first time, Marcus looked away from the horizon. Upward. Toward orbit. And in that instant, the sky above Karen 7 flickered. Not like lightning. Like something had blinked. The dragon on the surface lifted its head. All of them did. Every creature in the atmosphere turned upward in perfect unison, as if hearing a signal beyond human perception. Then they rose. Not flying. Not accelerating. Ascending. Space did not resist them. It parted. Reality itself bent around their movement, stretching like fabric pulled through unseen hands. Orbital platforms transmitted one final burst of data before vanishing mid-sentence. Then silence returned to space. No debris. No wreckage. No distress signals. Just absence. Marcus stood motionless as the last traces of orbital contact dissolved. The dragon on the ridge lowered its head slightly. And the final message arrived. Not as sound. Not as transmission. But as certainty. Your gods were never compatible. The first response from Earth did not arrive as panic. It arrived as doctrine. Within 17 minutes of Karen 7 losing orbital contact, the Unified Earth Defense Council convened emergency priority broadcast protocols. Civilian channels were overridden. Military command nets were encrypted. Entire planetary networks shifted into wartime posture across 6 systems. On Earth, they did not yet believe in dragons. They believed in malfunction. In sabotage. In unknown alien technology misidentified as myth. Admiral Jonas Krell stood aboard the command carrier Resolute Dawn, hands clasped behind his back as the holographic war table assembled around him. Fleet projections spun in luminous blue, battle cruisers, carrier groups, planetary suppression assets all aligning into a single offensive formation. We are not dealing with an unknown organism, Krell said evenly. We are dealing with a hostile planetary-scale intelligence that has compromised one of our colonies. A pause. Then, colder. We will remove it. The fleet assembled quickly. 17 battle cruisers. 9 dread carriers. 12 orbital bombardment platforms. Thousands of automated strike drones. The kind of force designed not for negotiation, but for rewriting planetary outcomes. Krell issued the final order himself. Begin saturation fire on Karen 7. Full orbital suppression. No surface remains active. In orbit above the system, humanity's answer to the unknown lit up the void. Energy beams lanced downward like falling stars. Kinetic rods released from high orbit accelerated into relativistic descent. Entire sections of space shimmered as gravitational lenses focused destructive power into planetary coordinates. Karen 7 became a target under godlike fire. On the surface, Marcus Hale felt the air change before the first impact arrived. Not through sensors. Through pressure. Through intuition sharpened by years of combat deployments. He looked up just as the sky turned white. The atmosphere ignited. Not with fire. With intensity. Beams from orbit struck the upper layers of the planet's atmosphere, compressing air into plasma curtains that stretched across continents. Mountains vanished beneath thermal shockwaves. Oceans boiled at their edges. Entire weather systems collapsed into violent atmospheric singularities. Inside outpost Virex, emergency lighting flickered under strain. Structural supports groaned as seismic feedback rippled through the crust. And Marcus allowed himself something dangerous. Hope. They can be killed, someone said behind him. Ree didn't respond immediately. She was watching sensor feeds that refused to stabilize, energy signatures overlapping, collapsing, reappearing. Orbital strike patterns showed total coverage. There's no way anything survives that, she whispered. For a moment, the sky agreed. Then the dragons looked up. Every one of them. Across the planet's surface, every surviving dragon oriented toward orbit in perfect synchronization. It was not reactionary. It was collective acknowledgement. As if the attack had finally met criteria for attention. Marcus felt it again. That pressure behind the mind. The same presence that had spoken before. But this time, it was led. Many voices. One intention. And then they rose. The sky above Karen 7 fractured again. But this time, it did not open outward. It opened upward. The dragons ascended through the atmosphere without resistance, passing through firestorms, plasma fields, and kinetic bombardments as if moving through memory rather than matter. Orbital weapons tracked them, recalibrated, fired again. The targeting systems failed one by one. Not jammed. Not destroyed. Corrected. Each firing solution updated itself mid-execution, adjusting for trajectories that no longer obeyed physics. Admiral Krell watched from orbit as his fleet began to break formation. "Maintain fire," he ordered sharply. "Do not let them reach us." He stopped. Because they already had. The first dragon arrived at orbital altitude without a visible transition. One moment, it was above the atmosphere. The next, it was between ships. A dread carrier flickered. Not exploded. Not breached. Simply erased from existence, leaving behind only a fading distortion where mass had been. Then another. And another. Fleet formations collapsed into chaos as vessels vanished mid-transmission. Weapons systems fired at coordinates that no longer contained anything real. Entire squadrons disappeared without debris, without warning, without even electromagnetic residue. Krell staggered back from the tactical display. "What is happening?" someone shouted. No one could answer. Because every sensor feed was failing in the same way. Not damaged. Not disrupted. Unresolved. As if reality itself refused to report what was occurring. Then the dragons stopped. All of them. Suspended in orbit around Karen 7. Facing the remaining fleet. And the message came again. Stronger this time. Heavier. Not spoken. Declared. Your gods were never designed for this space. The fleet's last systems went dark. Ships began to flicker out of existence, starting from the edges of formation inward. Communication channels collapsed into silence. Command chains disintegrated mid-order. Admiral Krell stood alone on a command deck suddenly too quiet for its size. He looked out at the void. At the dragons. And for the first time in his life, he understood something that had no place in doctrine. This was not war. This was correction. On the surface of Karen 7, Marcus Hale watched the sky empty itself of human presence. No ships remained. No signals returned. Only dragons descending once more through the atmosphere, settling back into orbit to surface dominance as if nothing significant had occurred. The largest of them turned its gaze downward. Toward him. And Karen 7 fell silent again. But it was no longer the silence of waiting. It was the silence of ownership. Karen 7 did not feel like a colony anymore. It felt like a stage set for something already decided. Outpost Virex was failing in slow layers. First the communication grid went. Then secondary power. Then environmental stabilization. Each system didn't crash so much as lose relevance, as if the planet itself was rejecting the concept of human infrastructure. Colonel Marcus Hale stood in the central command hall, watching the flicker of dying holographic displays. Outside the reinforced walls, dragons circled the colony at a distance that suggested patience rather than aggression. Their movements were slow, deliberate, almost ceremonial. Shadows passed over the outpost in rhythmic intervals, like something studying a heartbeat. Dr. Lyra Ree stood beside him, arms tight across her chest. "We've lost orbital contact," she said quietly, as if repeating it might make it less final. "We've lost planetary defense synchronization. We've lost everything that could talk to anything beyond this world." Marcus didn't respond immediately. His eyes were fixed on the tactical display, what remained of it. Small red icons blinked and vanished. Not destroyed. Just, no longer acknowledged by the system. "How long until full collapse?" he asked. Ree hesitated. "Of the colony? Or the planet?" That got a reaction. Marcus finally looked at her. She swallowed. "Structural integrity is failing in localized zones. Atmospheric processes are shutting down without command input. Even our backup reactors are fluctuating. It's like the planet is undoing us piece by piece." Marcus exhaled slowly through his nose. "So they're not attacking anymore," he said. Ree shook her head slightly. "No. They're waiting." That word hung between them. Waiting implied intention. Waiting implied outcome. Waiting implied that something was already decided and time was just the interval before acceptance. A low vibration ran through the floor. Both of them felt it at the same moment. Not an earthquake. Not machinery. Something deeper. Marcus turned toward the sealed corridor leading to the colony's restricted systems. "What is that?" he asked. Ree didn't answer right away. Her eyes were locked on a data stream that was no longer stable enough to interpret. Then she whispered, "It's coming from below us." Marcus moved. He didn't run. He didn't order. He simply walked, and every instinct he had developed over decades of military command told him that whatever came next would not respect hierarchy. They descended into the core levels of Outpost Virex. The deeper they went, the quieter the world became. By the time they reached the reactor access corridor, even the emergency lights had dimmed into a dull amber pulse, like a failing heartbeat. Behind sealed bulkheads, something was wrong with the colony's power system. Not damaged. Not overloaded. Unstable in principle. Ree stopped walking. "No," she said softly. Marcus turned. "What?" Her voice cracked. "They've accessed the core network. That's impossible. There are physical locks, quantum seals, manual overrides." Marcus stepped past her and placed his palm on the reactor chamber door. It was warm. Too warm. Like something on the other side was already rewriting heat distribution. "Open it," he said. Ree stared at him. "Marcus, if we open that." "I know," he interrupted. A long pause. Then she complied. The door unlocked with a heavy mechanical sigh. Inside, the reactor chamber was not behaving normally. The containment field shimmered irregularly, collapsing and reforming in cycles that didn't match any known energy pattern. The reactor core, normally a stable controlled singularity of fusion output, was flickering like a signal losing coherence. And in the center of it all, something was present. Not physically. Not fully. But undeniably there. A presence that made the edges of perception feel strained, like the mind refusing to render what it could not categorize. Ree took a step back. "That wasn't here before," she whispered. Marcus didn't answer. Because he could feel it now too. Not with instruments. With awareness. The same pressure from before. But closer. More focused. Then it spoke. Not aloud. Not telepathically in the way they had experienced earlier. This was deeper. Like thought embedded directly into the structure of existence. "This world has been selected for termination." Ree stumbled backward. No, that's not." Marcus raised a hand, silencing her without looking away from the core. "Who are you?" he asked. A pause. Then the answer came. Not immediate. Not emotional. Simply factual. "We are the correction layer." The reactor core pulsed. And for the first time, Marcus understood what had been happening. Not invasion. Not conquest. Not even judgment. It was audit. A system checking reality for inconsistencies. Ree's voice broke again. "Marcus, what does that mean?" He didn't look at her. "I think," he said slowly, "it means we were never supposed to pass inspection." The core flared. Somewhere above them, the dragons shifted in formation. As if responding to a command no human had issued. Marcus turned toward the emergency override panel embedded in the corridor wall. It was old. Classified. Never meant to be used. Ree saw what he was doing immediately. "No," she said sharply. "You don't even know what that does." Marcus placed his hand on the panel. "I know exactly what it does." A pause. Then quieter. "It ends the conversation." Ree grabbed his arm. "That's planetary self-termination protocol. It doesn't just destroy infrastructure, it collapses all energy systems into cascade failure. It kills everything, Marcus." He finally looked at her. And for the first time, there was no command in his expression. Only decision. "I know," he said again. Above them, the reactor core pulsed once more. And somewhere in the sky, the dragons turned their attention downward. As if listening. Marcus activated the sequence. The panel lit up in slow red progression. Final authorization required. He entered it. And the world began to count down. The countdown did not announce itself with alarms. It began with silence. A structured, deliberate absence of sound across Outpost Virex, as if the colony's systems had agreed, simultaneously, to stop pretending control mattered. Colonel Marcus Hale stood at the emergency override panel, his hand still resting on the activation interface. The red light beneath his palm pulsed once every second, steady as a heartbeat that did not belong to him anymore. Dr. Lyra Ree stood a few steps behind him, frozen between disbelief and instinct. "You actually triggered it," she said softly. Marcus didn't answer. Because beneath the colony, something had already begun to wake. The protocol name appeared on every remaining display that still functioned. Project Ashfall, Planetary Termination Cascade. Ree shook her head slowly. "That's not a weapon system. That's erasure architecture. It was never cleared for deployment." Marcus finally spoke. "It was never meant to be needed." A low vibration rolled through the structure. Not from outside. From below. Deep in the planetary crust. The reactor core, now fully compromised, began to destabilize in a way that no longer resembled physics. Containment fields folded inward instead of outward. Energy signatures inverted. Space inside the chamber began to behave like it had lost agreement with itself. And then, the dragons reacted. For the first time since their arrival, they moved with urgency. Above the colony, silhouettes that had once drifted like gods in observation broke formation. Massive wings beat against the atmosphere, not in dominance, but in alarm. The sky filled with shifting shadows as they converged toward the reactor's location. Ree stepped back. They're trying to stop it. Marcus stared at the panel. No, he said quietly. They're trying to understand it. The countdown reached 6 minutes. Deep beneath them, Karen 7 began to change. Not explode. Not fracture. Unright. The surface of the planet started losing coherence in layers. Mountains did not collapse, they faded, like sketches being erased by an unseen hand. Rivers lifted upward, dissolving into particulate light before they could spill into anything resembling motion. Even the sky began to lose definition, color draining into a uniform, oppressive gray. Ree grabbed Marcus's arm. If this completes, there won't be anything left. Not even signal residue. Not even trace matter. Marcus nodded once. That's the point. Her voice cracked. Whose point? He didn't answer. Because above them, the dragons reached the outer edge of the colony's airspace. And stopped. All at once. As if they had collided with something invisible. A boundary. Not physical. Not energetic. Conceptual. The countdown reached 3 minutes. The reactor core below surged again, and this time the surge was not contained. It expanded through infrastructure pathways, through buried conduits, through planetary-scale energy grids that humans had built but never truly understood. Karen 7 was no longer resisting destruction. It was cooperating with it. Ree backed away slowly. Marcus, this isn't a self-destruct system. He looked at her. For the first time, his expression wasn't certainty. It was recognition. It's a reset function, he said. The words landed heavier than anything else that had happened that day. A planetary reset. Not destruction. Revision. The countdown hit 90 seconds. Outside, the dragons began to flicker. Not physically vanishing, but losing stability in their presence. Their forms distorted at the edges, like projections struggling against interference. One of them attempted to descend closer to the colony, but its body fragmented mid-motion into cascading geometric breaks before reassembling higher in the sky. Ree whispered, "They can't enter it." Marcus watched them carefully. "No," he said. "They can't interface with it." The implication settled in. Even they were not compatible with what had been triggered. 60 seconds. The reactor core collapsed inward. Not imploded. Folded. Space around it began compressing into something that no longer behaved like a physical object. Gravity reversed in localized spirals. Light bent into impossible angles. The colony's internal structure began to lose dimensional consistency. Ree's voice was barely audible. If this continues, the concept of the planet gets erased. Marcus nodded again. I know. 30 seconds. The dragons made one final attempt. All of them. Every surviving entity in the sky aligned their presence toward the core beneath the colony. Their combined force pressed downward, not as attack, but as intervention. Reality itself trembled at the intersection of their influence and the Cascade Protocol. For a moment, everything stalled. Humanity's last command. And something older than command responding. Marcus felt it then. Not fear. Not triumph. Understanding. They're not gods, he said quietly. Ree looked at him, tears forming without falling. What are they then? Marcus stared at the collapsing world around them. Gatekeepers, he said. And we just opened something they were built to contain. 10 seconds. The dragons stopped resisting. Not defeated. Not victorious. Acknowledging failure of containment. The countdown reached 0. And Karen 7 ended. But not with explosion. Not with fire. Not even with silence. It ended with subtraction. The planet folded inward along invisible axes, collapsing every structure, every ocean, every mountain, every trace of biological and artificial presence into a single point that no longer existed in space or time. The dragons were pulled into that collapse as well. Not destroyed. Rewritten. Reintegrated into whatever system had just completed execution. For a moment. There was nothing. Then. A final message, not heard but remembered by something that survived the transition. World state unresolvable. And then even that memory faded. When the system finished, there was no Karen 7. No colony. No dragons. No war. Only ash that never settled. And somewhere, in a registry no human would ever access again, a single entry updated itself. Observation node, closed. Reason, world self-terminated before completion of evaluation.